So here we are. This podcast started in January to give people something to listen to during what was then a long lockdown period because of the pandemic. And this last episode comes at a time where we are well on the way to resuming something that looks a bit like normality in society. And today's guest provides a nice little symmetrical story of a made in Teesdale experience. My name is Simon Henderson. I am Head of History and Sixth Form at Teesdale School, and this is episode 25 of Made in Teesdale.
Made in Teesdale.
And we actually sat there one night watching John Wayne's stage gospel projected onto the wall while looking down at the scene below.
It is absolutely fascinating seeing inner city London children dropped into the middle of a working farm.
I have very fond memories of growing up in Teesdale. I mean, living in the countryside and having, loads of fresh air, loads of space to play.
It really is the case that if you come from County Durham, and in my case have lived in southwest London for 40 years, County Durham's still what I call home.
Made in Teesdale.
So, episode 25, the final episode of this Made in Teesdale podcast. And my guest is Tabithaillard, who actually started Teesdale School and was in my form class back in the day, from her time in year 7 right the way up to her time in sixth form. And Tabitha started at a tiny little primary school in Teesdale, and she's ended up being a teacher back at that tiny little primary school in Teesdale. So a perfect final episode of this Made in Teesdale podcast. Hi Tabby, how are you?
Hi, I'm okay, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, yes. So tell the listeners about your early Teesdale experiences, where you grew up and all things in your early life.
Okay, so I'm originally from Kent, but I moved up north just before I was 2. I moved to Eggleston, which is where I still live now. For primary school, I went to Bowes Primary, which was really, really tiny primary school. I know there's been other people on the podcast that have also been to Bowes Primary School.
Yes.
So I was there all the way from reception to year 6 before coming to Teesdale and being there all the way through year 7 to year 13.
Okay, so how did you find out? I've asked this question to other people who went to Bowes Primary School. How do you find that jump up from a very teensy weensy little primary school?
Yeah, it was definitely a step up. I mean, from going from a year group of 14 in a class of less than 20 to all of a sudden being in a year group of over 100 and each class being 30, knowing so many more people. It was definitely a big step, but I think because I already knew, obviously, the people I've been to Bowes with, it didn't feel too bad, and I made friends pretty much straight away. I think Teesdale itself did a fantastic job of settling everybody in. I remember doing a 2-week summer scheme project in the summer between year 6 and year 7. That made a massive, massive difference, just getting to know some of the other children, getting to know some of the staff, getting to know my way around the place, because coming from a tiny school like Bowes, when you're in the same class all day and there's only 3 classroom areas, to all of a sudden having to navigate yourself around a massive building with lots of different blocks, seeing a timetable with C numbers, S numbers, N numbers. It was a big change, but definitely one that was very well prepared for.
Talk to us about the next transition, which was transition from primary school to a secondary school, and then the transition into sixth form. Tell us about the subjects you did at sixth form and how you find that.
Yeah, so that was a much smaller transition, obviously, because I already knew people there. So I did, in year 12, I did French, English language, history and maths. Had yourself as my history teacher. And then I dropped French after AS. So I carried on English language, history and maths onto A2. Work-wise, it was definitely a step up from GCSEs, but then having subjects that you're definitely interested in was a massive benefit. I think the breadth of GCSEs was brilliant, getting to get stuck in with lots of different subjects. So I did music and drama as my sort of not maths and Englishy based GCSEs, and then having all of those to focus on, to all of a sudden just having the few was lovely. It allowed me to get really more in depth with subjects I was really interested in. It helped prepare me for university with the more research and self-led side of sixth form, which I really enjoyed.
So you mentioned university. What did you go on to do?
So I went on to Durham University to do a primary education with QTS degree. So it's a 3-year degree, originally based at Queen's campus in Stockton, but then I moved up to Durham City for my 3rd year. So in my 3-year degree, I gained my BA honours degree, but I also gained qualified teacher status. So from the end of that 3 years, I became a fully qualified teacher, which is exciting.
Exciting times, yes. So that means that you're in your NQT year, doesn't it?
I've just finished my NQT year. I delayed it a little bit because my dad was ill. He became ill during my time at university. And then sadly, he passed away shortly after I graduated. So I took a little bit of time out of teaching just to help my mum. And then went into it, got my first NQT job, and have just finished my NQT year as of a couple of weeks ago.
And back at one of the schools that you actually started at as a student?
Yes, indeed. I now work at both Cutherston Primary School and Bowes Hutchinson's Primary School. Obviously, my old school with some of my old teachers I now work alongside, which is lovely.
That must be very... I know myself, the odd time as a secondary school teacher, I've had some of my ex-students come and do some teacher training here, or even become a member of staff here, and that's always interesting, and it's nice to see how people have developed in what is relatively a short period of time. So if you taught somebody for A level and then they go to university, then they qualify as a teacher and they come back in their early 20s, it's only 4 or 5 years after. However, if you've taught somebody as a little person under the age of 11, that's a long time. It's double that amount of time for them to go away, go to university and come back. So how did you find that sort of relationship with those ex-staff? Because they're going to see you as little Tabby and your teacher Tabby.
Well, both Mrs. Scaife and Mrs. Headley, my class 1 teachers, are still here. I work alongside them daily, and it's wonderful. I mean, it must be pretty strange for them, I think. I think it must be pretty strange for them because they obviously knew me when I was that little. They still seem to remember my first day and from when I first came to visit the school. But it's lovely. I think they were the reason that I went into primary teaching in the first place. They were my inspiration for doing that. The experiences I had here at Bowes were so fantastic. I wanted to give a little bit back, and especially give a little bit back to schools in Teesdale, and to give it back to the school that sort of made me who I am today is, well, cliche, but it's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's really... There are people that inspire you. I can remember history teachers myself that inspired me, but that you usually, when you talk to people, they inspired me and then I went off to do something. It must be really rewarding for the 2 primary teachers that you mentioned, that you were inspired and then you've come back and you're actually working alongside the people that inspired you. And so how obviously you had you had memories of them as your teacher when you were in reception year 1, year 2, or whatever, and then now you work alongside them. How does that add to your appreciation of them as teachers? Because now you're looking at it from the perspective of someone who is qualified to be a teacher themselves, and you're looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think we've got things to offer each other, really. So obviously they've got wealth of experience. They've got many, many years behind them with fantastic track records and the respect of hundreds and hundreds of children that they've taught over the years. Whereas I bring something new to them, really. Being recently qualified, obviously I have more perhaps up-to-date knowledge with some things, and I'm now MFL coordinator across the 2 schools, across the federation, and that is something that I know some teachers struggle with teaching foreign languages. If it's not something they've had an experience of themselves, it can be an area of difficulty. So I hopefully help them out with that. I can prepare resources for them. I can teach them how to speak different languages. We had a Russian session the other day, and I was lucky enough to be able to do GCSE Russian at Teesdale. So I've been using that knowledge to teach some of the staff at both schools Russian and teach some of the children. We got involved with a project with Durham University, and a student was on Teams with us teaching some of the children Russian there, and I was able to help out with that. So I think it's definitely a two-way process, and the fact that I already knew the staff and they already knew me was lovely, because the connection was instantly just there, and I felt so comfortable.
So this is a really stereotypical comment. Do they all come running to you when they've got some sort of IT issue? Like, come on, Tabby, how does this work?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I've had a few of them come up to me and say, "Come on, you're in your 20s, you know what you're doing."
It works the other way. When something goes wrong with my technology, I ask the kids, because there's absolutely there's a certainty that they're going to understand what's wrong with my phone or what's wrong with my computer more than anyone else will. But that I suspect that's never going to change. So, where do you see yourself in 5, 6, 7 years' time? Are you thinking that you would like to be a head teacher of a primary school? What would you like to do?
Well, I think if you'd have asked me this question when I was at Teesdale, I'd have said yes, I want to be a head. But I think, having now spent more time in a school and working closely alongside the head teacher of the federation I work in, I don't think I'd be cut out for it. I think it's such a big undertaking, and I know head teachers work so incredibly hard. I definitely see myself pursuing the coordinator roles. So I'm predominantly, I like teaching Key Stage 2. And so I see myself sticking in Key Stage 2, becoming coordinator of perhaps other subjects. So I also did an English specialism in my degree. So yeah, just progressing that way, really. But don't think I'm quite cut out for headship.
What do you do when you're not in the classroom? What does Tabby do to unwind?
I'm quite into arty things, which I don't feel like I ever was until I became a teacher.
I don't remember you being particularly arty, I have to say.
I wasn't massively, and I've become a lot more so, I think, since having to make things look pretty for children. I'm also still musical, so I still do a lot of music things. I still like to sing, although obviously I can't do much with that at the moment.
Unless you're outside in the field on your own, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have to clap happy birthday in school. We can't even sing it, which is so sad. Yeah, so I still do a lot of that. And yeah, that's about it, really.
So what you mentioned about clapping happy birthday. This is going out as the last episode of Made in Teesdale, so that's a special episode in itself.
Oh, wow.
And the episodes were almost entirely recorded during lockdown, and even the ones that have aired more recently, since the restrictions have been lifted slightly, they were still recorded back in lockdown. So we are now hopefully starting to come out of that, and we're on the sort of steps towards normality. how has your life in the primary school changed, if at all, since the restrictions have started to be lifted compared to where we were, say, the middle of last year?
Well, it's changed quite considerably. We're still very much in bubbles. So because obviously the two schools I work in are quite small, we have a Key Stage 1 bubble at each and a Key Stage 2 bubble. We still wear masks in the classroom and in public areas. There's still the constant hand washing and just ensuring the kids and ourselves are safe. But we're getting back more into the curriculum now, which I think was lost definitely last year when nobody really knew what was going on. And I think the children now, because they understand it so much easier, everything's flowing a lot better. The children definitely seem a lot happier. There's a massive focus on well-being, which I think is incredibly important. So we have regular assemblies with the children. We do regular PHSCE sessions. And I think it's really important to keep those going and just making sure that the children know we're around and that any worries they may have, whether that's anything related to the pandemic or not, I think it's allowed children and us staff, to be honest, to just feel a lot more open about things and just knowing that we're all there for each other, whether it's physically or virtually. And I think that's just really important. So it's definitely changed since last year, but I think some things have changed for the better and some things are things that we'll continue to do even after, fingers crossed, after all this is over.
Yeah, I think, obviously working in a secondary school, a lot of the focus and a lot of the national focus has been on what's happening with exams, and obviously that's children 16 and 18-year-olds. What would you say, from what you've witnessed, is the main impact that this pandemic has had on children of primary school age?
There's definitely big gaps in knowledge. I think naturally the children have had so much time away and it's been such a stressful time for them. It's difficult to do home learning. So during the last school closure, I was very active in putting together home learning and teaching those at home and teaching a key worker bubble in school. So I had pretty much the same number of children in school as I did at home. I think that addressing the gaps is definitely a really important thing for us to do at the moment, seeing what children have missed, what skills they need to move on to the next stages, and obviously preparing them for you at secondary school and making sure that they leave us with as much as we can possibly give them.
And what do you think, that's the sort of academic side of it, what do you think they missed on a sort of personal, emotional level, children of that age not being in school?
They missed masses. I mean, I remember the first day when they all came back, just seeing them all interacting with each other again. It was absolutely beautiful. They've missed each other so much. And I think that play element is particularly important for children. They need to socialise with others, they learn from others, they develop from others. And it helps them socially and their well-being, their mood. And that was definitely something that was missed over the pandemic. It's not the same talking to a friend over a computer screen. And it was particularly hard for a lot of them, I think, not being able to touch the friends, not being able to give them a hug, not being able to play a proper game of TIG, anything like that. And it's difficult to explain it to children of that age, but they've been amazing. They've all really pulled together, and it's lovely to see how they've bounced back from it as well.
Yeah, it's often what they say about children, is it? Children, when they talk about little kids getting ill, they go downhill very fast, but they bounce back quite fast. And I think that's really true of some of the emotional and personal impact of the pandemic. So this is the last episode of Made in Teesdale, and it's quite apt that here's someone who is made in Teesdale in terms of grown up in your primary school, having moved up from Kent, and then here you are back in Teesdale, not only back in Teesdale, but in the same primary school that you actually started yourself in year one. So as a sort of little summary, tell us what's so great about Teesdale. Why we've done this. This will be the 20-something episode with loads of people who've gone on to do loads of amazing things. And I'm quite biased, having worked in Teesdale for 20 years, that I think it's amazing. You tell me and the listeners why Teesdale's so amazing.
Oh, a summary. Wow. I think it's a completely different way of life here. The rural side of it is just, it's lovely. It's not for everybody. I mean, some people might not enjoy the quieter side of things. They might like being in a bustling town or city centre. No, I'm definitely the opposite. I love the rural side. I love things being quiet. I love the community aspect of living in Teesdale. So living in Eggleston basically all my life. I've grown up there. I've been involved in a lot of things in the village. A lot of people there know me. I love just knowing that there's that support network there, which you perhaps wouldn't get in a busier area. The Teesdale as well, obviously, with having a lot of small schools, both primary and secondary. Again, it's that community feeling like you know everybody. It's that line of being a name, not a number, and that's definitely true in Teesdale. And it's beautiful. You can't deny how beautiful it is. I feel really lucky looking out of my window every morning and just seeing countryside and fresh air and animals. I wouldn't really live anywhere else, I don't think.
I think that's a marvellous summary, Tabby. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure, and it's very apt that this ends up being the last episode of Made in Teesdale in its current incarnation. So thanks very much for giving your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think Tabby summed it up beautifully there, and I think the majority of people who live in Teesdale, who work in Teesdale, would not want to live or work anywhere else. So, episode 25 of Made in Teesdale, the final episode of Made in Teesdale. I have thoroughly enjoyed catching up with former students, catching up with former students of the school that I had never met, people who came to the school before I started working here, but also former students who I have fond memories of, both from a relatively long time ago and from relatively recently. This podcast was designed to give people something to listen to during lockdown, to celebrate everything that is great about Teesdale and how wonderful the people of Teesdale are and how inspiring the students who have been to Teesdale School and gone on to do incredible things are. I hope that you have enjoyed listening to it just a tiny fraction as much as I have enjoyed making the podcast. And if that's the case, you will have enjoyed it a great deal. So thank you very much for all the people who have downloaded and listened to this. Watch out for some more podcasts from Teesdale School and Sixth Form in the future. And until then, as I always say, take care, stay safe, goodbye.